Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. With Daniel Ricciardo's sudden departure from Formula 1, the big question is what exactly are Red Bull cooking up in terms of their driver decisions over the next couple of years? There's no doubt their driver succession plan right now is an absolute disaster. They've got no one waiting in the wings to try and replace Max Verstappen if he were to leave the team, and now Ricciardo's gone as well. That seriously raises the question, are they going to look outside? And the latest rumour has been over the Singapore Grand Prix weekend that George Russell will be Christian Horner's target if Max Verstappen decides to go. Is he the man to go for? Does it make sense for both parties, especially if Kimi Antonelli does a very good job against Russell in that Mercedes next year? Does it make sense for Red Bull? Is Russell capable of leading them to championship success as Max has done over the last few years? Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always. Firstly, big news on Michael Andretti and the Andretti global situation. They're trying to get a spot in Formula 1. They've been approved by the FIA, but Formula 1 management has said no. There were even rumours from Mario Andretti that basically Mr. Maffei, I think specifically at FOM, had said, and basically Liberty Media, had said to Michael Andretti that, like, I'm never going to let this guy on the grid. Now, today, he has relinquished his ownership stake in the team. It's kind of unclear exactly why, because he still wants to maintain some role in the process, and you can debate whether things aren't going so well, or with him stepping down, does that increase the likelihood if someone else is buying that ownership stake? If it's a certain partner, Formula 1 may like them, they might get the spot. I don't know. I thought it was kind of interesting that this individual on the Reddit put together, I don't really know if this is absolutely 100% legit or not, but I don't really heard anyone else talk about this, so I thought it was worthy to mention that they use this SPAC, so this special purpose acquisition company, to effectively go public, and the feeling is there's been various filings with the SEC, and it's possible that given that various outside investors invested and controlled that SPAC, they might need to sell some shares to pay some of that money back. I don't know, it's all speculation. It's kind of unclear why right now, but the understanding is that he intends to remain with Andretti Global in a more strategic position rather than an operational one. So definitely some changes over there with Andretti potentially trying to change things around to get that Formula 1 spot approved. We'll see if they're successful, of course, in the near future. But let's talk about the Danny Ric situation. There's more to say on this, of course, based on information that's come out over the last 24 hours or so since the departure. Ricciardo, of course, gave his announcement, of course, and we had lots of reaction from the drivers themselves. Hamilton gave some nice words. Perez gave some nice words. And to be fair, many of the drivers and teams in his Instagram replies gave some really, heartfelt messages to Daniel Ricciardo, what he's done for the sport, and, of course, his next adventures and whatever that might potentially look like. There was a bit of drama just because the replies to Daniel from his own team, Red Bull and Visa Cash App, were just like a heart emoji with no extra words. It actually took the other teams that he never drove for to give some nice sentiments, which I thought was kind of strange. But look, Red Bull have talked about it in some detail and basically said after he left Red Bull, he decided to leave, his killer instinct was gone, and we know that Marco, really, Ricciardo's more of a Christian Horner guy. Christian Horner likes him more than Marco does. Marco prefers Yuki, obviously, and Marco was pretty ruthless, saying that his killer instinct was gone. I don't know what happened to him, would have helped him if we could, type thing. The intention, of course, of bringing him back was for him to get the Red Bull seat, and that's what Marco says. I think it was clearly communicated that he has to be significantly better than Yuki, and he only managed that in a few races. It's kind of tough for Yuki, right, because, Tsunoda's damn good as far as I'm concerned, and unfortunately for him, he's effectively become the benchmark, hasn't he, right, for any driver in that team. If you can beat Yuki, you might be good enough for Red Bull Racing. If you can't, then you're not. But it seems like Tsunoda will never get that chance. So Marco says Ricciardo was told he had to beat Yuki and do it comfortably, and he didn't. He was worse at the start of the season. Then he kind of got on level terms over the last, let's say, 10 races or so, but, not comfortably beating him at all. And look, Ricciardo this season, was he good enough to keep his seat next year? I wouldn't say so necessarily. Was he bad enough to be fired mid-season? I wouldn't say so either, right? He was kind of anonymous in some respect, which probably didn't help his cause either. And I guess it became clear for Red Bull that he's not going to get the Red Bull Racing seat. They're not going to replace Perez because money or something, I don't really know. They're keeping him around even though they're losing the championship. Maybe it was worth a try with somebody else, but apparently not. And therefore, where's the future, especially given the fact that they've said quite clearly, RB, that they will be becoming slightly more of a junior team again, with additional support for their junior drivers coming through the program to try and actually help them get into the sport, especially with Behrman and Colapinto doing a stellar job. It shows that the likes of Lawson and maybe others could also do a good job in F1 as well. And Ricciardo himself said, maybe he was a bit past it, 35 years of age, wasn't able to quite compete and keep up as he used to when he was in his prime. And when he was in his prime, there were years where Ricciardo was in the conversation for being the best driver in the entirety of Formula 1. So I think it's clear to say that Daniel Ricciardo had not necessarily done enough to deserve that seat. I actually was pretty convinced he wouldn't have that seat next season. The question in my mind was, would he get the Red Bull seat, or would he, not get any seat at all? I think that was the debate, and seemingly he didn't do enough. And look, I'm all about a meritocracy. Logan Sargent, I was roasting him for months because he wasn't performing and he needed to go. Eventually he did, and that's the sport at the end of the day. And the same applies for Ricciardo. The thing that frustrated me yesterday was just the manner in which this has been handled. I don't think it's good on any side, really, especially from the Red Bull perspective. And we get more information on that today because Liam Lawson said that he knew about this for 2 weeks. They decided, Red Bull, long before Singapore, even before Baku potentially, that Lawson was getting the drive from now to the end of the year and Ricciardo was going to go. Like, this was a done deal. The deal was done. Lawson was informed. Ricciardo apparently knew about it as well, and yet for some reason they just didn't say anything. And I don't know if this is going to lose Lawson brownie points because he's kind of exposing that Red Bull have, let's be honest, mismanaged this, because it's not, Red Bull said during the weekends, the Red Bull guys, the RB guys, oh well, we're just undergoing an evaluation, this race is part of it, we'll make a decision after the weekends. But the decision was made 2 weeks ago, but yet the public messaging is different, and it leaves both Lawson and Ricciardo in a tricky spot, right? Lawson himself has got loads of replies to his tweets, giving him a load of stick, which he doesn't deserve, but he's just caught in the crossfire of all this drama, really. So yeah, Lawson says it's been the plan for a long time where this was heading, had a contract date in mind. They needed to say, look, you're getting a seat by this date, which eventually they did. And he says a couple of weeks ago they told me that was going to happen, and not after that. It was set in stone. So they'd made the decision a couple of weeks ago. It was locked in shortly after that, but yet during the weekend they didn't say anything. And Helmut Marko says that there were certain factors and obligations that prevented it being announced. I don't know, what are those obligations or factors? Feel free to speculate. But Marko says he was informed, I think, and therefore the fastest lap was a worthy performance. And he says it shows the potential that he's had. Would have been nice to have him at Red Bull Racing, but it was, not to be, basically, because he was not good enough or efficient enough or ruthless enough in terms of his decimation of Yuki Tsunoda, which of course never happened anyway. So Ricciardo is now out of the sport. That seat has gone from Gasly to De Vries. And again, for Red Bull, it's what were they doing putting De Vries in the car? Respectfully, I think that, people that knew Wheel knew that was not going to end well. Then Danny Rick was, look, they did him a favour on some level bringing him back, but just the way that things have ended has left a sour taste in the mouth of many. But Lawson getting the drive is probably the right thing overall. I think it is probably the correct decision. This is the way that Red Bull work. It's pretty ruthless, right? If you're not performing, if you're not part of their future plans, they will just cut you mid-season, even if you've not been performing terribly. So that is on brand for Red Bull. But I just think they could have done a bit more, could they not? And Lawson probably feels the same way, given what he's known about this contract now for some time. The other interesting piece, because yesterday I said, because we didn't really know at the time, that I was assuming this contract was for the rest of this year and probably for next year too. But no, this contract is only for the remaining 6 rounds, which is very interesting in terms of what it says about what Red Bull are actually trying to achieve here and why they are making these decisions now. Because the reality is their driver lineup at Red Bull Racing is not just set in stone with only one driver, it's set in stone with 0 drivers. Max is not guaranteed to stay, and Perez is frankly not good enough to stay, I would say, as it stands. So they're desperately searching, Red Bull, for some sort of replacement to either of those seats. For whatever reason, they don't see Yuki Tsunoda as the guy, whether it's character, whether it's outright top-end pace they've not been impressed by. I don't know, that's their decision, it is what it is. They're searching for somebody that can be that guy, and that is the only reason I can see why Lawson only has a deal for 6 races, because they're going to say, look Lawson, get in that AlphaTauri, or whatever it's called now, the RB, outperform Tsunoda, or at least match him and be competitive, and if you can prove that you can handle the situation, show some good pace, deliver some stellar performances above expectation, maybe like Colapinto's doing right now, then you might get the Red Bull drive next season, not even just the RB drive, which they could set settle for, but I think they want to replace Perez, to be honest, at Red Bull. And a couple of days ago, right, we saw rumours that Perez apparently is going to announce his retirement in Mexico. We heard those rumours last year, so I'm a little bit skeptical to believe it, but there is a rumour anyway that Perez is going to, be ceremoniously waved off effectively. Goes to Mexico, finishes the race. Maybe if he can get a podium, that would be sensational, but let's say he doesn't, and then he announces retirement, whatever. Like, that might be a way to do it, but then it means that Red Bull needs somebody, and it could be Liam Lawson if he does a good job. The difficulty for Lawson is that he has to take a new engine in COTA. So, he's going to take a 10-place grid drop, which is probably going to send him to the back of the grid, to be honest. So they should probably just stick in all new components, to be fair. But yeah, unfortunate return for Lawson. He will take that in the race, by the way, not the sprint. I'm pretty sure that's how it works anyway. Don't know why I clicked on that, but I'm pretty sure it's the main race that this affects, not the sprint race. So the sprint race, he will start from where he qualifies, and then the main race, he will start from 10 places further back than he qualifies for that. I'm pretty sure that's how it will be anyway. And it does now mean that Isaac Hadjar, one of the actual juniors that's shown some good promise that Red Bull have, is the new reserve driver for Red Bull after Lawson's move. So Hadjar's another one to consider, but he's not going to be ready to step straight into the Red Bull seat alongside Max. The only drivers they have that could are Yuki. Ricciardo was an option, but clearly they decided he wasn't good enough. And Lawson, they want to ensure, they want to see if Lawson's good enough, and that's why Ricciardo had to go, effectively, is the way things are. And maybe if Lawson gets the Red Bull seat, Hadjar might get the RB seat, and that might go quite well. He's been good in Formula 2 this year, bit up and down, shown some promise, but, whether he's a Formula 1 driver of the future, I'm not so convinced. But to be fair, I probably would have said a similar thing about Colapinto, and we know how that's gone over the last few rounds. But the question really is for Red Bull, what this means for the grander plan, right? Because Christian Horner has been hinting at this over the last couple of weeks, and actually over the last few months, on whether George Russell is a potential replacement. The other day, we've seen rumours that Oscar Piastri is a man to keep in mind as well, and maybe in an ideal world, they have a lineup of Piastri and Russell, or Piastri. I mean, in an ideal world, you keep Max, obviously, but if they can't keep Max, because either Max is fed up with the FIA, constantly muting out his swearing and he wants to retire. Even today, there was an interesting story in the World Rally Championship where some of the drivers over there are refusing to speak in press conferences as kind of like a boycott in some sense, in a similar way to what happened with Max Verstappen. So the FIA and Ben Sulley were certainly on the back foot over this, largely because of Max. But if Max gets continually fed up with that, more races, more sprint races, etc., etc., Max, I think he's a winner, obviously. He's a winner. I think he's a champion at heart. But do I believe that he is going to be unwilling to give up the sport before he gets to 8? There's some drivers, if they're in Max's position, they would just not want to quit until they try and win 8 world championships and eclipse the record. As much as I think Max is an incredible competitor, I don't really think, at least what he says, I don't think that's quite him. I think if Max isn't happy with the way things are going, he will just step away and he'll say, I won 3, 4, 5 world championships, and that was a great career. I want to do some other things. As much as Max in the car and in the moment is an absolute determined winner, wants to be the best ever, I still think he would be willing to step away if the time were to be right. And he would certainly be willing to step away from Red Bull if their car isn't performing, as it currently isn't. He was close this weekend, but he hasn't won now in 8 races, something like that, which is unprecedented, obviously. And Mercedes, maybe Aston Martin at some point, can offer Max something pretty special, certainly from 2026. And Alonso partnering with Verstappen, according to Lawrence Stroll, might be the way to go. Certainly Aston Martin have made it very clear, or at least it's been heavily reported, given the Newey acquisition and the fact that Honda are going to be there as well, that they would be a very attractive option for Max in 2026. And Mercedes seem to be Jos Verstappen's kind of favoured team to go to as Max's father, and they can offer a fair bit as well, probably, at least possibly, the strongest engine come 2026 Mercedes. That at least is the present rumour. And there's a good set of reasons for Max to go to either of those teams, especially with Red Bull on the trends they are currently on. So Max staying is not at all guaranteed. Perez going is likely, let's be honest. They probably want to put Lawson in the car as well. And therefore that leaves the question, is there realistically a candidate number 1 driver for Red Bull to take over for Max? Because their management of their junior program over the last, decade really, apart from Max, has been pretty shambolic, right? I mean, the Kvyat situation, the Gasly situation, the Albon situation, and then what's happened over the last couple of years with De Vries, and then, all these decisions have been very strange in some respects, and they don't have a driver that's a plug-and-play championship challenger in the car. And who are they going to get? I think the hope in some ways of Christian Horner, if Max were to leave, is that Kimi Antonelli does a great job at Mercedes and therefore Russell might be available. Because Christian Horner has now said this a couple of times, that his team would be foolish to not consider Russell for 2026. Russell is an excellent driver as far as I'm concerned. Like, look, Hamilton isn't having the best season in terms of qualifying, he admitted that himself, but any driver that's capable of beating Hamilton over a season in qualifying is, you know, worthy of serious praise. And yes, his race pace and his race management and some other factors aren't quite there as they might be in an absolute top driver like a Lewis or a Max or an Alonso, but they're not far away. He is certainly a driver to be considered, and it makes sense that Red Bull probably are considering him, right? I mean, the race made an interesting video on this as well a couple of days ago where they mentioned this quote when Christian Horner has said back, I think this was in like March time, that, well, Russell's out of contract end of 2025, the market moves. So implying that he was potentially on their radar then. Now, are you ever going to see Max and Russell in the same car next to each other at Red Bull? You know, never in a million years as far as I'm concerned. I mean, Max and Russell, they've had their fair few incidents over the last years. Baku last year, Las Vegas last year, another example too. And Red Bull don't like to do that for their number one drivers. They want them with someone who's good and probably better than Perez is performing, but not too good that it causes some sort of friction, which is why their supposed interest in Piastri is also rather interesting, because Piastri, managed by Mark Webber, is clearly not willing, either himself or his management, to be a number two driver. And that would also be the case at Red Bull if he was to join with Max. So the rumours about the interest in Piastri and in Russell from Red Bull over the last couple of weeks and months certainly imply they are prepared for the Verstappen departure. That is the key takeaway, that, well, maybe they're not prepared, but they are trying to be prepared for a world in which Verstappen is no longer driving for their team, because they just don't have the talent pipeline to make this work. They've got some talented drivers in there, you know, Lindblad is coming up as well, Hadjar we just mentioned, but you know, no one massively on the radar such as a Kimi Antonelli. And I think that is the question right now on what's happened next year at Mercedes, because, you know, for all Toto might say, as in this quote, that, well, Christian's trying to stir things up, George has always been a Mercedes driver, and I hope that he always will be. George is part of Mercedes. He's got a long-term deal, he said. He's not really got a long-term deal. He's got a deal, George, for one more season. And do I believe that Toto's hope is that George will always be a Mercedes driver? You know, I actually don't believe that. I think that Toto's hope is that Max leaves Red Bull, comes to Mercedes, and that Kimi Antonelli is effectively the next Verstappen, in which case Max, in this ideal Toto dreamland, wins the championship with Mercedes 26-27, retires, and then Antonelli wins the championship 28 and beyond, potentially, right? I think that's like, if Toto Wolff could write a script of the best outcome over the next few years, I think that's what he'd write. I don't exactly know if George Russell fits into those plans. He may do, and it depends on the Verstappen situation. It depends how competitive Kimi Antonelli is and consistent Kimi Antonelli is in next year's car. But if the Mercedes was the best car on the grid, I've no doubt that George would at the very least be a championship challenger, and Red Bull are understandably going to feel the same way of the drivers that are gettable, and Lando was a couple of years ago, but obviously isn't now. At least they tried to get Lando, but it never happened. He decided against it, and as it stands, looks like a pretty successful decision for Lando Norris. But of all the drivers you could get, the two that you would probably look at are Russell and potentially Piastri. And it obviously, Red Bull have been linked to both of those guys in recent times. So certainly implies to me that it's far from a guarantee that Verstappen is going to stick around anywhere. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Speaking of Max, this is pretty interesting, I'm not going to lie, the King of the Streets Championship. Now, you can debate whether circuits like Australia or Canada are really street circuits. They are, technically. They don't always feel like it, but look, they're included here, whatever. Some of these circuits certainly are street tracks. It's Verstappen on 112 points over these 7 races, Norris on 112, Leclerc on 110. So pretty much whoever finishes higher out of these 3 in Las Vegas will be the king of the streets for the season. Not like it really matters, but I thought it was kind of cool. So very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.